What if I told you that the story of Yao Ming was never really about basketball? What if I told you that one of the most dominant centers to ever step foot on an NBA court was actually a prisoner of his own success? A man who carried the weight of 1.4 billion people on his shoulders, but never had the freedom to choose his own path? This is the story you've never heard. The tragedy of Yao Ming. Standing at an absolutely monstrous 7 feet 6 inches tall, Yao Ming looked like he was genetically engineered to play basketball. And in a way, he was. But we'll get to that later. In 2002, when the Houston Rockets selected this unknown giant from Shanghai with the first overall pick, most of America had no idea what they were getting. Here was this towering figure from China who moved like a tree in the wind, spoke broken English, and had never faced competition like what the NBA was about to throw at him. Charles Barkley famously made a bet on national television. If Yao Ming scored more than 19 points in any game during his rookie season, Chuck would kiss Kenny Smith's behind on live TV. The round mound of rebound was so confident that this oversized kid from overseas would be another international bust that he was willing to humiliate himself on national television. But what Charles Barkley didn't know, what none of US knew, was that Yao Ming wasn't just some tall kid who happened to be good at basketball. This man had been dominating the Chinese Basketball Association like a video game character on rookie mode. In his final season in the CBA, Yao was averaging 32 points, 19 rebounds, and 5 blocks per game. Those aren't just good numbers, those are video game numbers. And yet, when he stepped off that plane in Houston, the narrative was simple: another foreign project. Another international experiment that would probably flame out like so many before him. The media painted him as this gentle giant who might be too soft for the physical nature of NBA basketball. They had no idea they were looking at a man who had been fighting battles his entire life that had nothing to do with what happened between the lines. See, when you watch Yao Ming play basketball, what you were really watching was a man trying to survive. Every game, every practice, every interview, it was all part of a much bigger game that started long before he ever touched a basketball. The truth is, Yao Ming never chose basketball. Basketball chose him. Or more accurately, basketball was chosen for him by forces completely beyond his control. And that's where our story really begins. Not in Houston, not in Shanghai, but in a system that viewed human beings as commodities. A system that looked at two tall athletes and decided they needed to create something even taller. Because before there was Yao Ming the basketball player, there was Yao Ming the science experiment. And understanding that difference changes everything about how we see his story. This isn't just the story of a great basketball player. This is the story of a man who spent his entire career trying to break free from chains that the world couldn't see. Chains that were forged before he was even born. So forget everything you think you know about Yao Ming, because the real story is about to blow your mind. If you're loving this deep dive into basketball history and want more untold stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're just getting started with these incredible stories that'll change how you see the game. To understand Yao Ming's tragedy, we need to go back to 1970s China, a time when the government controlled everything: your job, your home, your future, and yes, even who you married. Meet Yao Ziyuan and Fang Fengdi, two of the tallest people in China and two of the most talented basketball players the country had ever seen. Yao Ziyuan stood 6 feet 7 inches and was a star center for the Shanghai basketball team. Fang Fengdi was 6 feet 3 inches and dominated women's basketball like few players ever have. But here's the thing: neither of them had chosen to play basketball. In communist China, if you were tall and athletic, the state decided your career for you. Basketball wasn't a passion for them. It was an assignment. And then something happened that would change the course of basketball history forever. The Chinese Basketball Association looked at these two giants and had an idea. What if they could create an even bigger player? What if they could engineer the perfect basketball specimen? So they arranged a marriage. Not for love, not for compatibility, but for height. This wasn't romance. This was a breeding program disguised as matchmaking. The government literally played matchmaker to create what they hoped would be the ultimate basketball weapon. And on September 12th, 1980, their plan worked. Yao Ming was born, and he was destined to be enormous. But while the world would later celebrate this genetic lottery, nobody asked the most important question. What did Yao Ming want? From the moment he could walk, basketball was shoved down his throat. At age 9, he was already 5 feet 5 inches and being scouted by professional teams. By 13, he was 6 feet 7 inches taller than most grown men, and the Shanghai Sharks had him training with adults. Here's the heartbreaking part. Yao Ming hated basketball. Can you imagine? This kid who would become one of the greatest centers in NBA history actually despised the sport that made him famous. He wanted to play handball. He loved swimming. But those dreams didn't matter because Yao Ming wasn't allowed to have dreams of his own. Every morning, he'd wake up knowing he had no choice but to play a sport he didn't love for a system that saw him as property, not as a person. His coaches in Shanghai were brutal. They'd make him practice until his hands bled. They'd force him to run until he collapsed. And if he complained, if he showed any sign of weakness, they'd remind him that he wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for all of China. The pressure was suffocating. Imagine being 14 years old and being told that the entire reputation of your country rests on your shoulders. That every shot you take, every rebound you grab, every step you make represents 1.4 billion people. But the most tragic part of Yao's childhood wasn't the physical torture. It was the mental imprisonment. He knew he was trapped in a life that wasn't his. He knew he was living someone else's dream while his own withered away. And yet, he kept playing, not because he loved it, but because survival in China meant doing what the system demanded. Rebellion wasn't an option. Freedom wasn't even a concept he could fully understand. So when you watch highlights of young Yao Ming dominating the Chinese Basketball Association, remember what you're really seeing. You're watching a man who learned to excel at something he never wanted to do, because excellence was the only way to stay alive in a system that viewed him as an investment rather than a human being. This is the foundation of Yao Ming's tragedy. Before he ever stepped foot in America, before he ever heard the roar of NBA crowds, he had already lost the most important game of all, the game for his own freedom. If this story is blowing your mind as much as it blew mine when I first discovered it, smash that like button. It helps more basketball fans discover these incredible untold stories. By the late 1990s, Yao Ming had transformed from that reluctant kid who hated basketball into an absolute monster on the court. Standing 7 feet 6 inches and still growing, he wasn't just playing in the Chinese Basketball Association. He was obliterating it. But here's where the story gets really twisted. The better Yao became, the tighter the chains around him got. Picture this. You're the most dominant player in your country's history. You're averaging 32 points and 19 rebounds per game. You're single-handedly selling out arenas across China. You're making the Shanghai Sharks millions of dollars. And yet, you don't see a penny of it. That's right. Yao Ming, the biggest basketball star in Chinese history, was essentially playing for free. The Chinese Basketball Association owned his contract. They owned his likeness. They owned his future. Hell, they practically owned his soul. And when NBA scouts started showing up to Shanghai Sharks games, when teams like the Chicago Bulls and the Dallas Mavericks started making inquiries, the Chinese government saw dollar signs. But not for Yao for themselves. The CBA had a rule that was basically legalized slavery. Any Chinese player who wanted to play overseas had to pay the league a training compensation fee. For most players, this fee was manageable. For Yao Ming, they wanted several $1 million up front, plus a percentage of any NBA contract he might sign. It was extortion, plain and simple. But here's where this story takes an incredible turn. Enter Fang Fengdi, Yao's mother. Remember her? The 6 feet 3 inches basketball player who had been forced into that arranged marriage? Well, she had been watching her son get exploited his entire life, and she'd had enough. Fang Fengdi did something that was unthinkable in communist China. She hired an American agent. She started negotiating with NBA teams directly. She went to war with her own government to free her son. The battles were brutal. The Chinese Basketball Association threatened to ban Yao from playing. They threatened to strip him of his citizenship. They painted his mother as a traitor to her own country. The propaganda machine went into overdrive, trying to turn the Chinese people against their biggest basketball star. Meanwhile, Yao was caught in the middle of this nightmare. On one side, he had the CBA and the Chinese government telling him he owed everything to his country. On the other side, he had his mother fighting for his freedom and NBA teams offering him life-changing money. But the cruelest irony of all, the Chinese media was selling Yao as this patriotic hero, this humble giant who played for the love of his country. They turned him into a propaganda poster boy, while simultaneously trying to keep him trapped in a system that was robbing him blind. The pressure was unimaginable. Every game he played, every interview he gave, every public appearance was scrutinized. Was he being respectful enough to China? Was he showing proper gratitude? Was he remembering where he came from? And through it all, Yao Ming had to keep playing, had to keep dominating, had to keep pretending that everything was fine while his entire future hung in the balance of a legal and political war he never asked to be part of. The man who looked like he had everything, fame, talent, adoration from millions of fans, actually controlled nothing. His career, his finances, his very identity were all pawns in a game being played by people who saw him as a commodity, not as a human being. This is what made Yao Ming's dominance in the CBA so bittersweet. Every thunderous dunk, every blocked shot, every victory was also a reminder that he was still trapped, still owned, still fighting for something that most people take for granted, the right to control their own destiny. Yao didn't know what awaited him in America. The only thing certain was that from that moment on, his life would change forever. And if you're into this era of basketball, with those epic matchups and classic uniforms, check out the links in the description for some retro jerseys we've picked out for you. After years of legal battles, political pressure, and his mother's relentless fight, it finally happened. In 2002, Yao Ming was free. The Houston Rockets had selected him first overall, and for the first time in his life, he was about to play basketball on his own terms. But freedom came with a price tag that would haunt him forever. The Chinese government had extracted their pound of flesh, millions in compensation fees, and a promise that Yao would still represent China in international competition. Even in liberation, the chains weren't completely broken. When Yao stepped off that plane in Houston, he was entering a completely different world. No more government handlers controlling his every move. No more playing for free while others got rich. For the first time in 22 years, Yao Ming was about to get paid to play basketball. But America wasn't ready for what was coming. Remember Charles Barkley's bet? That cocky prediction that this oversized kid from China would never score more than 19 points in a game? Well, on November 17th, 2002, Yao Ming scored 20 points against the Los Angeles Lakers. Barkley had to kiss Kenny Smith's behind on national television, and America got its first taste of what this giant could really do. But the real transformation wasn't happening on the court. It was happening inside Yao's head. Enter Steve Francis. The Rockets' explosive point guard took one look at this shy, awkward giant and decided to become his big brother. Francis didn't see a foreign project or a marketing experiment. He saw a teammate who needed help adjusting to American life. Francis taught Yao about American culture, helped him with his English, and most importantly, showed him how to have fun playing basketball. For the first time in his life, Yao was learning that basketball could be joyful instead of just survival. The change was remarkable. That stiff, robotic player who had arrived from China started developing a personality on the court. He began smiling during games. He started talking trash. He was finally playing with the freedom that had been stolen from him as a child. And then came the moment that changed everything. January 17th, 2003, Toyota Center. The Houston Rockets versus the Los Angeles Lakers. Yao Ming versus Shaquille O'Neal, the most dominant center in basketball. Everyone expected Shaq to demolish this rookie. O'Neal was in his prime, weighing 330 pounds of pure muscle and intimidation. He had just won 3 straight championships. He was supposed to welcome Yao to the NBA the hard way. Instead, Yao Ming put on a clinic. Every time Shaq tried to back him down, Yao held his ground. Every time Shaq went up for a dunk, Yao was there to contest it. And on the offensive end, Yao was making shots that left the entire arena speechless. The crowd was going absolutely insane. Here was this rookie, this kid from China who supposedly wasn't ready for NBA basketball, going toe-to-toe with the most feared player in the league and not backing down an inch. When the final buzzer sounded, Yao had outplayed Shaquille O'Neal. Not just survived, dominated. 20 points, 6 rebounds, and the respect of every single person in that arena. But the most beautiful part of that night wasn't the stats or even the victory. It was watching Yao Ming smile. A genuine, pure smile of someone who had finally found joy in the game that had been forced on him for so long. That night, America fell in love with Yao Ming. And more importantly, Yao Ming finally fell in love with basketball. Within 2 years, he was an all-star. The awkward giant who had arrived speaking broken English was now one of the faces of the NBA. He was averaging over 18 points and 8 rebounds per game. He was blocking shots, hitting three-pointers, and proving that skill could triumph over raw athleticism. Yao wasn't just playing basketball anymore. He was mastering it. And for the first time in his life, he was doing it because he wanted to, not because he had to. This was Yao Ming's conquest of America. Not through force or politics, but through pure basketball brilliance and the sheer joy of finally being free to play the game his way. By 2007, Yao Ming had reached the mountaintop. He was averaging 25 points and 9 rebounds per game. He was a multiple-time All-Star. He had finally convinced the world that he wasn't just some oversized novelty act. He was one of the most skilled big men the NBA had ever seen. And then he got the teammate he had always dreamed of, Tracy McGrady. T-Mac was everything Yao needed, a dynamic scorer who could take pressure off him, a superstar who could help carry the load. Together, they were supposed to turn the Houston Rockets into championship contenders. For the first time since arriving in America, Yao Ming could see a clear path to the one thing that had always eluded him, an NBA championship. The 2007 to 2008 season started like a fairy tale. Yao and McGrady were unstoppable together. The Rockets were winning games they had no business winning. Playoff hopes were turning into championship dreams. And then, in one horrific moment, everything changed. February 26, 2008. A routine play against the Phoenix Suns. Yao planted his left foot to make a move in the post, and his body betrayed him. The sound was audible throughout the arena, a pop that every basketball fan has learned to fear. Stress fracture in his left foot. For most players, this would be a 6 to 8 week injury. For a 7 feet 6 inches, 310-pound giant whose entire career depended on his feet supporting that massive frame, it was a death sentence waiting to be served. But here's where Yao's tragedy becomes truly heartbreaking. Even as doctors were telling him he needed surgery, even as the Rockets were begging him to think long-term, there was another voice calling to him. A voice he couldn't ignore. China needed him. The 2008 Olympics were coming to Beijing. It was going to be China's moment to shine on the world stage, their chance to prove they belonged among the global superpowers. And they needed their basketball hero to be the face of their Olympic dreams. The Chinese Basketball Association didn't ask Yao to play through the injury. They demanded it. The government made it clear that skipping the Olympics wasn't an option. After everything China had done for him, after all the investment they had made, he owed them this. So Yao Ming made a decision that would haunt the rest of his career. He played through the pain. The 2008 Olympics in Beijing were magical for China, and Yao was at the center of it all, leading the Chinese national team, playing in front of his home crowd, representing his country on the biggest stage imaginable. Every game was a celebration. Every victory was a national triumph. But every step was also destroying his foot. The stress fracture was getting worse. The pain was becoming unbearable. His teammates could see him grimacing after every possession. But Yao kept playing because that's what he had always done. Sacrifice his body for everyone else's dreams. When the Olympics ended, the damage was catastrophic. What started as a minor stress fracture had become a major structural problem. Yao's foot was essentially held together by willpower and painkillers. The next few years became a nightmare cycle of surgeries, rehab, brief comebacks, and more injuries. Each time he returned to the court, fans held their breath, hoping this time would be different. And each time, his body broke down again. The cruel irony was that Yao's mind was sharper than ever. He had developed an incredible basketball IQ. His passing had become sublime, and his shooting touch was better than it had ever been. But his feet couldn't support the dreams his brain was creating. In 2009, another foot injury. In 2010, a broken foot that required a metal plate and 7 screws. Each comeback became more desperate, each failure more heartbreaking. Tracy McGrady's career was derailing at the same time. The championship window that had seemed so wide open was slamming shut. Yao could feel his NBA dreams slipping away, one injury at a time. The most painful part wasn't the physical agony. It was the knowledge that his sacrifice had been for nothing. China had gotten their Olympic moment, but Yao Ming had paid for it with his NBA legacy. He had traded his championship dreams for someone else's propaganda victory. By 2011, the writing was on the wall. Yao's feet couldn't handle the stress anymore. Every doctor he consulted said the same thing. If he kept playing, he risked permanent damage that would affect him for the rest of his life. This wasn't just about basketball anymore. This was about being able to walk without pain when he was 40, 50, 60 years old. This was about quality of life versus the game that had defined his entire existence. And so, at just 30 years old, with so much basketball left to give, Yao Ming had to make the most difficult decision of his life. The giant who had conquered America, who had proven every doubter wrong, who had finally learned to love the game that had been forced on him, had to walk away. The price of greatness had finally come due, and it was more than any human should have to pay. What do you think? Was Yao Ming's sacrifice for the 2008 Olympics worth destroying his NBA championship dreams? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these complex stories. July 20th, 2011, the day the basketball world lost one of its brightest stars. Yao Ming, at just 30 years old, announced his retirement from the NBA. No championship ring, no finals appearances, no storybook ending. But here's what the critics got wrong. They measured Yao's legacy by what he didn't accomplish instead of what he did. Yes, Yao Ming never won a championship, but he did something far more important than winning rings. He changed the entire landscape of basketball forever. Before Yao, the NBA was an American product exported to the world. After Yao, it became a truly global phenomenon. He didn't just open the door for international players. He kicked it off its hinges. Think about this. When Yao entered the NBA in 2002, basketball barely registered in China. When he retired in 2011, over 300 million Chinese people were playing basketball. 300 million. That's almost the entire population of the United States. Yao Ming turned basketball into China's second most popular sport, behind only soccer. He single-handedly created a basketball culture in the world's most populous country. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is about the kid in Shanghai who saw Yao Ming on TV and believed that maybe, just maybe, he could make it too. The real story is about barriers being broken and dreams being born in places where they never existed before. Every Asian player in the NBA today, from Jeremy Lin to Rui Hachimura to Paolo Banchero, they're all walking through doors that Yao Ming opened. Every time an international prospect gets drafted, every time a team takes a chance on a player from overseas, they're building on the foundation that Yao laid. And here's the beautiful irony. The man who never had a choice in playing basketball became the reason millions of people around the world chose to pick up a ball. After retirement, Yao could have disappeared. He could have spent his days counting his money and nursing his broken feet. Instead, he did something that perfectly captured who he had always been. He kept fighting for others. He became the owner of the Shanghai Sharks, the team that had once exploited him. He used his platform to promote wildlife conservation, becoming a global ambassador against shark finning and ivory poaching. He worked to reform Chinese basketball, trying to create the system he never had, one that put players first. Most importantly, he started the Yao Ming Foundation, dedicated to improving the lives of children through sports and education. The kid who had been used as a political pawn was now using his influence to actually help people. In 2016, Yao Ming received the ultimate validation when he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. But even that moment was bittersweet. There he was being celebrated for his basketball achievements, while the real achievement, surviving a system designed to exploit him and emerging with his humanity intact, went largely unrecognized. Today, when you watch the NBA, when you see players from every corner of the globe competing at the highest level, when you see basketball being played and loved in countries that barely knew the sport existed 20 years ago, you're witnessing Yao Ming's true legacy. He may never have won a championship ring, but he won something much more valuable. He won his freedom. He won the right to define his own legacy, and he used that freedom to change the world. The tragedy of Yao Ming was never that he didn't win a championship. The tragedy was that he had to overcome impossible odds just to have the chance to try. The miracle is that despite everything the system threw at him, the exploitation, the injuries, the political pressure, the early retirement, he still managed to transform not just basketball, but the lives of millions of people around the world. That's not a tragedy. That's the story of a true champion. In the end, Yao Ming didn't need a ring to prove his greatness. He had something better. He had impact that will last forever. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all. Some legends are measured by the championships they won. Others are measured by the championships they made possible for everyone who came after them. Yao Ming belongs in that second category, and that makes him one of the greatest champions basketball has ever known.